Good morning, good evening, or good night, depending on where you are in this great big ball of green known as Earth. My name is Mr. Delay, and today on the Delayed Teacher Podcast, we've been tasked with answering some teacher questions, or teacher interest questions, through our PLC from our instructional coaches for our grade level PLC, so for our 6th grade PLC. And so we were given the opportunity to use technology, or any kind of methodology, if you will, to create a way to represent our answers to those questions. And I decided, you know what? I love doing podcasting, so we're going to do a podcast. So buckle up for a special edition of a Delayed Teacher Podcast from Fort Morgan, Colorado, USA. The following podcast is not endorsed by, supported by, or produced in cooperation with any education entity, such as a school, school district, school staff, administrators, or students. The opinions, ideas, and thoughts expressed within are solely those of the podcast host and or guests of the program. Thank you. So welcome to the podcast. Again, this will be a shorter one than usual because I'm just having some fun with some stuff, but I wanted to share with you my answers at least so you could kind of see it. So this idea is that you choose 3 questions from a list to answer in one of the 4 ways listed below. Like there's verbal, artistic, technology, writing. Well, I'm a podcaster and I love creating things through technology, and so I decided that the best way for me to represent my answers is to record them in a podcast and kind of just spitball about them and brainstorm about them. I would have done a video blog, but that would have taken time to edit and create, maybe next time. But for now, it's in podcast form. And so the verbal is you use like a video recorder. Artistic, you use like a poster paper or other medium that you want to answer your question with. You use technology, which is like Google Slides or drawings, or you do it in writing. Well, I'm kind of doing it in 3 different ways because I'm using verbal, I'm using technology, and I'm using writing. So 3 for 3, baby, shooting from the field, touchdown, field goal. I don't play sports. I don't know what those things mean. I'm a language arts teacher. What do I know? So the questions that I decided to answer, and I'm probably going to answer like 4 or 5 just because I can in a podcast form and have fun with it. So one of the questions I chose was on what topic or topics would you never make jokes? And this actually came up in class this week in our literacy class. We were talking about Percy Jackson, and in the Percy Jackson books, he talks about how he's a D student, he's been kicked out of school 6 times, and he struggles with dyslexia. And it was fascinating. None of my kids really knew what dyslexia was because I said, hey, what word up there on the board is a word you have a question about? And universally, every single block said, well, what's dyslexia? So it's kind of a cool moment to go, oh, I can show you what this looks like. So I talked about dyslexia and how it affects a processing disorder in the brain, and how it is the way we read normally is our way of reading, but for someone who is struggling with dyslexia, that is a whole other issue. And there's a cool video. There's a lot of videos on YouTube that say this is what dyslexia looks like. And a couple of them were cool, but I was looking at the comments of some of them, and one of them was like, hey, this video represents it so well. And it represented dyslexia in a way that kids were just sitting there going, that is so hard. How do they read? And I said, well, that's the thing, is that someone with dyslexia or someone who struggles with dyslexia, they struggle even harder to read. And one of my students raised her hand and said, yeah, no, I have a family member in my extended family who has dyslexia, and she just gets mad a lot in class because it's so hard for her to process to read. And then I said, well, it also affects writing. And so it's hard for them to write because there's something in their brain that's just not working as well as it could be. And the kids were like, oh, is there a cure? I was like, well, no, it's a lifelong thing. And I said, a lot of times you'll see people in movies make jokes, or even people who, like your friends or people in the world, make jokes. Oh, if they mix up words or whatever, they say, oh, well, I'm dyslexic. And I didn't realize the power of that until I went to teacher school, School of Education at Metropolitan State University of Denver, shout out to them, that is harmful. Like, dyslexia is not a joke. It's an intense thing. And so for our kids, if there are kids in my blocks who are dyslexic or who aren't speaking up about it, or I don't know about it, I was like, guys, you got to know that everyone's struggling with something. And so there's things that I just won't joke about. And disabilities, there's humor, and then there's being a jerky jerk. And in my opinion, as a middle school teacher who handles and teaches middle schoolers, disability jokes are not a thing we do. And I take a pretty hard stance on that, and I think it's kind of one of those things. So that's kind of a serious way to start off the podcast. The next question I answered was, what is your greatest irrational fear? Well, this is a fun one. I love this story because when I was a bachelor, my greatest irrational fear was choking on food at home when I was alone. Because when you're a bachelor or you're single, there's nobody in the house, like if you're eating dinner, and my fear was choking. This fear creeped in at least 3 times a month. I would be eating and I'm just enjoying my food, and all of a sudden I'd be like, what if I choke? What if I choke and no one's here to help me? What if no one can perform the Heimlich? And I would needlessly worry through the meal until I finished going, oh, thank God I'm alive, I didn't die. And it was like this weird, irrational thing. But what was funny is that I mentioned it to someone once. And it's like, oh, this is my fear. This is what I really want. They're like, oh, you know what you do? I was like, what? Oh, you use a chair. It's like, what? Yeah, when the Heimlich. Like the Heimlich idea is that there's impact that then causes it to dislodge, and so if you don't have somebody in the house, you just hit yourself on a dining room chair. If it's wood and strong enough to take you just and it works. And I was like, oh, that's comforting, but it still didn't make my fear go away. It almost made it worse because then I feared, what if I don't do it right? What if I do I have to practice this? Do I need to go to a practice session at a community center? Where it's like, if you're home alone, this is how you do the Heimlich with a chair. I didn't know. I was worried. I was freaked out. So then when I got married, I was like, well, at least if she's home with me, I won't die. She'll be able to perform the Heimlich. Unless she doesn't, which now is my brain is going, oh my God, what if my wife doesn't know how to do the Heimlich? So after this podcast, when I go home, we're going to go, honey, I need you to do some studying on the Heimlich because I need you to know how to do it. Because if I choke, I need you to be able to save me. Oh, this podcast is fantastic. It brings all the new fears. So my new irrational fear is that my wife doesn't know how to do the Heimlich. So there you go. Take that and put it in your file of analyzing Mr. Delay. Let's see. What else questions did I answer? My favorite TV series. Oh, boy. I loved, I would say as a kid, my favorite TV series was Star Trek The Next Generation. Because I loved Star Trek. And I loved the cerebral concepts that were at battle in the episodes. It wasn't always a battle and a fight and a fisticuffs. Picard was very cerebral and thoughtful and very involved with his crew, and there was always a conversation happening, and there was decisions to be made across the board. And it was always just fun to watch those characters kind of wrestle with concepts that we struggle with today. It was fun to see that transposed into the future and what that could look like, and how at our base our humanity is still broken in ways of how we view and judge things and do things. And so that was my favorite show as a kid. My favorite episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, it's a tie for Relics, where Scotty comes back. James Doohan came back to star in an episode called Relics, where he got pulled out of a transporter buffer and got to meet Geordi LaForge and walk around the Enterprise. And there's a moment where he goes into the holodeck, and the USS Enterprise original bridge, James Kirk's original bridge, is there, and he just kind of salutes it. And there's this moment of we know that some of those guys are gone, and we know that moment, that life he led is past, and now he is stepping into a new world. And there's a lot of cool conversations that come out of that. The other one is the Darmok episode, where Picard gets stranded on a planet with a guy who does not speak his language, and so they have to figure out how to communicate through both word and motion. And it is absolutely brilliant. It's one of the more famous episodes of Next Generation because it takes the idea of the things that are the same within us as creatures or people or things or aliens, whatever you want to call it, that there are commonalities across the board. And it speaks, I think, to the idea that, oh, well, that person doesn't understand what I'm going through. It's well, no, I think they do. Even though they're half a planet away, they still understand that concept. That's not, humanity is universal. In our struggles and our pain and our things, and so that was just kind of a fun episode. Let's go for the third question. I should probably answer. This is the one that I give. So the question is, what person has given you the best advice about your life? And I think it's come from various sources in my time. When in my early 20s, I always was very anxious and panicky. I would always feel guilty and bad about failure and not doing the right thing or not getting things done or not working hard enough. And when people would correct me or give me constructive criticism, I would just internalize it and struggle and wrestle and I hate myself, I'm a terrible person, I'm a terrible employee, and I would just It would just be a constant cycle. And it finally came, several people were just like, look, Mr. Delay, don't panic. Like, it's not the end of the world. These things do not define you. They are errors. They are mistakes. They are, as Bob Ross would say, happy mistakes. They're or happy trees. Sorry, happy trees. Happy trees. But happy mistakes as well, if you want to take the Bob Ross view of things. But it was like I had to realize that, it doesn't define me. It defines that day. But even then, that day can get a lot better 2 hours later when something amazing happens. And so I say that to my students. I say, look, don't panic. There are bigger things in the world that we should worry about than not doing well on a single quiz. Like, the quiz doesn't define you. Yeah, should you have studied more? Absolutely. But you know what? Tomorrow's a new day. Tomorrow we get a chance to do it all over again. We get to rock it out and be amazing. And just think about that amazing. It's a theological reference, but there's the verse, obviously in the Bible where it talks about worry about today, worry about tomorrow. And that's a universal theme, I think. It's not just biblical, but it's a universal theme of like, you know what, today's going to be a hot mess maybe. Today might be a great mess. Maybe today will be a bad mess. It'll be a thing. Today will be a thing. Tomorrow will be another thing. And let's get excited for what we can do tomorrow to make it even better. And that's what I tell my students. I'm like, you know what, look, today, didn't do so great on that, but guess what? You get to do it again tomorrow in a different way. And they're like, what? Because again, sixth graders can't see beyond the day. Like, their world is so small and so compact and so dramatic and so involved and so it's basically like a seesaw that just kind of is at a frenetic pace on a motor, and it's just like to tell them, take a breath, sit down for a second. It's gonna be okay. Breathe. Don't panic. We can do this. Can we do this? You can do this? Okay, cool. Let's get it done. And that's kind of what I do. So that's life advice that I would give others as well that was hugely important to me, is that, it's not the end of the world. Don't panic. Let's get through it. And we can. As I always say on Twitter and anywhere else in between, we are much better together. So hopefully this was entertaining to you. It was entertaining to me for the last 11 minutes or so. A unique kind of podcast in the entry of the A Delayed Teacher podcast. My name is Mr. Delay, and I am a 6th grade literacy teacher in Fort Morgan, Colorado at Fort Morgan Middle School on the northeastern. Let's try and get my directions correct. I am not a geographer. I am a language arts teacher. In my defense, on the northeast plains of Colorado, 77 miles from Denver. If you have any questions, you have any thoughts, hit me up. A Delayed Teacher on Twitter. And we will see you in the classroom. You've been listening to A Delayed Teacher podcast, hosted by Mr. Aaron Delay and his guests. If you'd like to express a viewpoint, have questions or concerns, you can reach him at A Delayed Teacher on Twitter. In addition, if you'd like to follow him through on his adventures in teaching middle school in Fort Morgan, Colorado, you can follow him on Instagram at the handle Mr. Delay. In addition, he also writes on a blog about his adventures from the beginning of his teaching education to his teaching adventures now. You can find that on the website adelayedteacher.com. If long-form communication is more your preference, you can also reach him through email at adelayedteacher@gmail.com. Thank you for listening to the podcast. We'll see you in the classroom. Our intro is provided by Long John's Jump by Daddy Longlegs is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribute Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 license. Our outro is provided by The Time to Run by Dexter Britton and is licensed under a Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike 3.0 International License. If you would like the links to either of these songs, please visit adelayedteacher.libsyn.com.